too.
All set, Leanne?
Yes, finally.
Do I need the longer preamble about,
No, because this, I don't see why, unless Bill disagrees, this was noticed as just a meeting that people can call in, and now that they can hear us and we can hear them, we shouldn't need roll call votes. It's not a, I mean, if you want to do roll call votes, that's fine, but I don't think we need to do the preamble, do we?
So, my understanding is that we're not having a virtual meeting, we're here, right? We don't have anybody participating as a member of the board that's not in the room, correct?
Laureen had wanted to participate.
She's on, and she can participate.
So if one of the members of the board is participating remotely, then it's all roll call.
Okay.
And I think that the rationale behind that is you can't, because they're not all in the room, you can't tell it's what.
But does he need to read that preamble is my question.
Oh, yes, I think so, yeah.
Do you have one handy, please?
On my computer, I don't have it.
I'll tell you what, you bring it up on your computer and I'll read it over there. I apologize, COVID-19 has presented us with many challenges. One of them is the legality of meetings with GoToMeeting and such and so forth. So I apologize for the delay, but it's in everyone's best interest to make sure we're operating legally. Yes.
I ask that everybody speak up so we can hear through the mask, because I can barely hear you being an old guy.
We will certainly do our best, sir.
Thank you.
All right. With that, it is it's 7:05, and this is the April 1st meeting of the Tufton Borough Planning Board. Before we get going, does anybody have any questions about procedures or public input about planning board matters? Okay. Well, whenever we have a larger application like this, I do like to spend a minute explaining to everyone why we're here and how this works and how it goes. And that goes back to the first meeting I was ever at. No one did. And I didn't understand a thing that went on. So this is the Tufton Borough Planning Board, and our job is mainly to write zoning and review applications that require site plan review. So site plan review are commercial, things like telecommunications towers, or if you wanted to do a business or change of use or something like that. So not only do we have zoning, but we also have site plan review regulations. So the planning board has to follow the zoning. We do not have the ability to change zoning in any way, shape, or form. Site plan review regulations, which are kind of a step above zoning, the planning board has the ability to waive regulations in the site plan review regulations if need be. And so you may hear speaking things like asking for a waiver or something or so forth. And those are waiving site plan review regulations. And that's basically what we do. The way it normally happens is we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping here with some minutes from the last meeting. I'm going to pull out the application. We really only have one this evening. We had another one that was put off to another night. The applicant will present it. They will present the application. The board may ask questions of them. At some point, it will be opened up to the public, at which point you will state your name, your address, and you will speak your piece. We ask that, one, you are respectful. I mean, these can be very passionate things, but respectful is the only way it happens in here. So that means no swearing, keep your voices down, treat everyone as you would like to be treated. Allow everyone to speak. Everyone here will have the opportunity to speak if you want to. If you would like to speak again and it's something new that you have already not spoke of, and as long as everyone else has spoken, you'll be allowed to again. Complex applications like this are not normally approved in one evening. So this is likely to be continued based on any number of reasons. So you'll have time to take in the information. The board has to take in a ton of information. And then it gives everybody an opportunity to read it, answer questions, these things like that. So with that, does anybody have any questions today?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have a question. Has the cell tower been approved for installation?
No. That's why we're here.
Okay, all right.
No.
Because I think the general thought amongst the people on Tuftonboro Net is that it had been approved.
No.
Okay, all right.
That's what we're here.
All right.
It's worth explaining that what the planning board deals with are uses that are permitted, meaning that the zoning has things that you're allowed to do. You're allowed to build a house. You're allowed to build a business in certain zones. And you're allowed to build telecommunication towers in certain zones in the town of Tufton. It's permitted. So there's court cases. The main one is a court case called Dartmouth versus Hanover, which says that if it's a permitted use and somebody can meet all the requirements, that are provided in the zoning, then a board has to approve. Now, on telecommunication towers, the most important part is the height. So zoning allows a tower to be 20 feet over the canopy in Tuftonboro. And it can be as high as 190 feet, as long as the carrier or the tower builder can prove certain things. So that's the main meat and potatoes of the meeting.
But it has not yet been approved.
No,
Is that
sir,
correct?
it hasn't.
And out of curiosity, are you the last stop? So planning board approves, does the selectmen then approve your motion, or you're the final say?
This is the last stop unless there's something there on the federal level that hasn't been met yet. And part of the site plan review requirement requires quite a bit of permitting to be done ahead of time. So any questions before we get started?
Thank you.
Okay. So with that, our first application, oh, I'm sorry, the preamble. Bear with me.
No, he has
As
to
the
do
chair of the planning board, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12 pursuant to the executive order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please know that there is no physical location, there actually is. There is a physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possibilities by video or other electronic means. We are utilizing open voice for this electronic meeting. All members of the planning board have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through this platform or in person. And the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting through dialing the following phone number: 409-231-183. B, providing public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting. We previously gave notice to the public of the necessary information for accessing the meeting, including how to access the meeting telephonically. Providing mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anybody has a problem, please call 603-486-2692 or email at hendrickson.leann@gmail.com, otherwise known as hendrickson.leann@gmail.com. D, adjourning the meeting if the public is unable to access the meeting. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes that are taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Okay, first up, this is the housekeeping approval of the minutes. Did anybody see any changes that were worth noting? I had one under section 3, Swift Family Trust. Third paragraph read, Jim Rines questioned the setback due to the 20-foot green space And it should be Jim Ryan's question to setback based on how the board would view road frontage.
I have no issues.
I'm fine.
All right, can I have a motion, and this will be roll call, to approve the minutes as written?
So move.
Moved by
Gary Qua.
Bill Markison,
Second.
George,
Yes.
Helen,
I'm Kate.
Kate, Jesus.
I don't know why you keep calling me Helen. I wasn't here, so I'll have to.
Oh, that's good. Matt Young, yes. Gary Claw,
Yes.
Yes.
Tony Triolo.
Carol Bush, yes.
All right, great. All right, first up, Verizon Wireless and James and Barbara Duncan, tax map 50-2-17, site plan review, installation of a telecommunications facility and associated equipment, formal subdivision and public hearing.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So my name is Scott Anderson. I'm a lawyer at the law firm Barrell in Portland, Maine. And I'm here tonight with Brian Ross from Structure Consulting and Oscar Suarez from Dewberry. Dewberry was the engineering firm that provided the plans. Brian and I worked together on cell phone tower permitting in New Hampshire. Brian's primary role is he's given information from the engineers at Verizon that are setting up the network as to where we have coverage gaps and coverage deficiencies. And he's given something called the search ring, which identifies area where if he's able to go get a tower of a certain size and place it within that area, that will address the coverage gap in the area that's being served by the project. So Brian goes out and works with the engineers, identifies the site, gets leases with property owners, and then I come in and work with Brian, and we meet with planning boards and code officers and local permitting bodies to go through the process that the chair had set out about making sure that we're complying with all of the requirements. So what we'd like to do tonight, because we appreciate there's a lot of information, is to walk through some of the key components of the project with you. There's a lot of information here. In addition to plans, there's environmental reports and sound reports and radio frequency reports. So we want to go through those kind of briefly with you. Answer any questions that you may have about the materials that we've submitted. And then our role for the rest of the evening is to listen to your thoughts, comments, and questions, to sit and listen to the public comment. Brian and I have reviewed all of the letters and emails that have been forwarded to Leanne before the meeting, so we've gone through those. And we'll probably try to address a couple of those in our initial comments. But then we're here to listen and take notes and try to answer questions as best we are able. Probably for the board, the best place to start is with the plans themselves that are at tab D in the application that we had provided to you. A cell phone tower project is pretty straightforward. Probably the best plan to start with is my favorite is Z7, which is, I think, you set it the third last sheet in the design plan. This shows the top view of the compound on the left-hand side and a side view of the tower on the right. As you probably noted, we are proposing a 130-foot tower at this site. It's going to be located within a lease area that's 80 feet by 80 feet, and within that lease area, there's a 50 by 50-foot fence surrounding the tower. And on the left-hand side of Z7, that's the top-down view looking at the facility. The components of the cell phone tower facility are pretty straightforward. You have the monopole in the center of the site, and we used to have these massive equipment shelters that were brought in on flatbeds. They were 25 feet long and 12 feet high and had fake stucco on the outside. But now we use a much smaller installation involving these cabinets. So off to the left of the tower pole, you can see there's the cabinets which have the electrical systems that deliver and receive cell phone signals from the tower. There's a backup battery in one of the cabinets that provides about 6 hours of power in the event of a power outage. And then just above that, there is a diesel backup generator, which will run about 15 or 20 minutes to test each week. And usually they set it for a Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning or some innocuous time. And then the generator will only kick in if we've lost power for 6 hours and the battery's drained. So pretty simple. It's all crushed gravel within here, and as I think you saw on the plan, there's about a 900-foot access road. It's going to follow an old skidder road. It's about 12 feet wide, gravel. Traffic to the site post-construction is very, very limited. On average, you might have a visit by a technician once a month, but if all is well with the site, you can go much farther, much longer periods of time without anyone going to the site. There's no lighting on the tower as far as kind of impacts of the site. There's no lighting on the tower at 130 feet or well below the FAA's 200-foot trigger for tower lighting. There is a work light on site that's identified on the plan. That's a motion activated light that only happens during emergency situations, mostly because technicians visiting the site would normally happen during kind of business daylight hours to the extent they needed to go and check on anything. So there is a backup emergency light. Given the distance to the property lines, there won't be any light that makes it very far outside the compound. We provided a sound report with the application. The town has a 50 decibel limit at the nearest property line. And so we did a kind of a worst case scenario model in which the two main sources of sound, which are the backup generator and a fan that helps to cool one of the cabinets, would be running full bore, which doesn't happen very often. But if that were happening, if we had a power outage that went for a long time and the generator kicked on full time, we're predicting about 39 decibels at the property line, which is well below the 50 standard. Usually the generator won't be running, and if just the fan is running, that's about 24 decibels at the property line, which is quieter than a library, and definitely quieter than my voice as a lawyer. Make lots of noise, even through masks. And for most times during the winter time and on days that aren't scorching hot, not even the fan is running. So a very quiet site, no lighting on the site, very little traffic. We also did and provided information that your ordinance required on our kind of archaeological habitat endangered species review that we do under a federal law called NEPA. We have to do that for every project because we have a federal FCC license. And so every single time we do a new site, we have to check to see if there's any mapped habitat areas or archaeological areas or endangered species in the area. And the NEPA report is attached to the application. The consultants went through all these different topics that they have to look at and concluded that there weren't any kind of NEPA issues that we had to be concerned with. There is this endangered bat that if you've dealt with development at all, you know that if you're anywhere near trees in the springtime, you have to watch for the northern-eared bat. But there are fish and wildlife rules that the construction teams follow when they do that, and so they have to search for nests and avoid them where possible. But with the exception of the one bat, no issues turned up in NEPA. In the application, we had initially asked for a waiver of the stormwater plan. Since we filed the application, the engineers have finalized and provided me with the stormwater plan, which I'll give to Leanne, that basically notes that the stormwater impacts are very minor, and actually post-construction will be better than pre-construction when it comes to rainfall landing within the project footprint, just because of the way we manage the site. So very, very limited impacts, and I'll make sure that that plan gets to all of you. So you won't need a waiver of the stormwater impact plan. I should note that in the application, there's a request for soil information, which normally you would want to review if we were putting in a subsurface wastewater treatment system to make sure that the system would work and it would perk and we didn't have bedrock. In the application, we noted that we won't have a subsurface system here, but probably it's better for us to formally request a waiver of providing the soils data on the basis that we're not doing a subsurface system, and therefore the soils information would not help you in evaluating our compliance with the standards in the ordinance. And as the chair mentioned, probably no decision today. I'll make sure that after this meeting, I follow up with a formal request in writing for the waiver for the soils data. And again, I think we're all set and don't need a waiver for the stormwater information. There's a couple of the big topics to talk about, but I thought maybe I should pause here and see if folks have questions about the actual site plan or the nuts and bolts components of the project. Obviously, we'll answer your questions whenever they pop up, but I figured I'd pause here and see if anybody had any specific questions about the components.
I just see on this plan, you have 3 areas delineated that say future carrier lease area.
Yes.
What does that imply might be there in code?
So the ordinance requires anybody that gets a permit from you folks to build a tower to make the tower available to subsequent companies that might want to add some antennas within the town. The idea being that it's better to co-locate than to build a new tower someplace because you minimize the total number of towers. So what the 3 kind of ghost arrays show is that the tower is structurally capable of holding 3 additional carriers. And I think we've also shown on the left-hand side spaces within the fence compound for other carriers to put their radio equipment, backup generators, and the like. So the goal is to try to make these, and your ordinance, really kind of focuses folks. If there's an existing tower within the area you're trying to cover, new carriers are supposed to go there first before they propose a new tower. So that shows that the site would be able to accommodate up to 3 additional carriers. We don't have information about other companies and what their coverage needs are. That's all proprietary, confidential corporate stuff that we can't figure out. So whether USL or AT&T or other carriers need a site, we don't know, but we want to make sure that we design a facility that could accommodate those installations if it did work for another tower.
Do they pay you to lease it, or do they pay the landowner?
Usually it's the landowner. I'm not entirely sure, maybe Brian knows whether we get, there are certainly tower companies out there that do this and rent 10 feet of space. The process of co-locating is something where all the carriers share each other's poles with each other because it's easier and simpler and most towns require it. So it's a good question as to whether or not there's actual rental payment going back and forth, or it may be that everyone is allowed access so long as there's no need to make any structural changes. I always invite Brian to holler if he's got.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I'll grab a chair and come up with Scott. With a project like this, Verizon Wireless is the owner would be the owner of the monopole, and so they would be the primary collector of the rent from an additional carrier. There are all sorts of different ways that can be split among whatever parties are involved.
So these 3 enclosed areas could be full of equipment.
That's correct. Yes.
Did your sound and stormwater calculations include it with all carriers or just with the initial carrier?
The stormwater would have, because it assumed that the entire fenced area would be impervious, which it actually isn't, but the addition of any additional equipment wouldn't change the stormwater calculation. The noise calculation would change if, in theory, you had 4 generators running at the same time. I think what would have to happen is that the planning board would have to evaluate co-location requests as they came in. I assume make sure that the site doesn't go over the threshold or waive it because it determined that it was better to allow multiple carriers in one spot.
I think the board would entertain it a couple of ways. One, you could do it as each additional carrier, or 2, have a sound study showing maximum capacity as it exists. And that would eliminate the need to come back should this be approved.
Okay. Yeah, and again, if we don't have a sustained power outage and it's not scorching hot, Nothing is making noise at the bottom of the tower, so you could have, in theory, 4 carriers there and you wouldn't hear anything. And it's really the generator that steps it up. As most of you know, when you look at sound, the difference between 24 and 39 is much greater than the difference between 12 and 24. You know, as you get higher up, it's much bigger. But even 39 at the property value, at the property line is like a loud library. So, you know, you probably find that the noises with a gen set would be pretty minor.
Scott, to understand what you're really leasing here, you've got a 50 by 50 for your equipment, but you actually have an 80 by 80 area. You have a 12-foot driveway that's 900 and some foot long. Is that the entire lease of the subject?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So,
Now, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead. Thank you.
Now, in reference to the fall zone to the tower, do you lease the area of the fall zone as well?
Not usually. I mean, I've probably done 200 towers in 15 years, and 80 by 80 is probably the largest lease area I've ever seen. Most of them are 70 by 70 or 50 by 50, even with a 190-foot tower. So there's usually a discussion with the property owner about the fall zone issue. Most municipalities that regulate it only measure the fall zone from the nearest abutting property line, and they don't count the lease line as the property line. So it becomes a discussion with the property owner about whether they have any concerns about that, what their development plans are in close proximity to the lease area. And in this case, we have a tower that is taller than, certainly than half the width of the lease area.
I think the site plan review regulations, or it could be the zoning, makes reference to the fall zone area structures within it.
Fall zone area does.
Fall zone, do you remember if it's in the zoning of the site plan review?
The fall zone area, you can get a waiver for to like 50 foot, I think.
So we can have the tower designed to hinge on itself so that in the case that there's a catastrophe and it falls, there can be a kind of a weak point in the middle that would hinge so that it's not like a pine. It's not going to have the entire foundation's not going to pull out of the ground and fall. They can have it where it's designed to hinge at like 60 feet or whatever. So it will just kind of fold on its own. That is a design that we can include.
It's, rather than get hung up on it, if you guys could look into the fall zone.
I can see them.
It's 13-4-3 setbacks. 13-4-3.
The base of any ground mounted facility between property line, road, habitable dwelling, business, or institutional use of public recreational area, 100% of the height of the facility.
And which unit? Oh, you're in, okay.
That's page 50.
All right. Not in site plan.
We'll double check, but I think we had read that as the property line, not the lease boundary.
Property line, road, habitable dwelling, business or institutional use. I guess that would be my question, is it's a habitable dwelling. It's because it's property line, comma, road, comma, habitable dwelling. Business or institutional use, so effectively you're making the fall zone around the tower. What assurity is that somebody doesn't build something in the fall zone around the tower?
Yeah, and right now under the lease, the landlord, in theory, has total rights outside of the 80 by 80 zone. I think our normal thinking is, normally a landlord doesn't build within the fall zone of a tower.
He would be prohibited from it,
It
actually.
probably would be.
Because this is in the zoning, so.
Yeah.
That answers that. The burden would be on the property owner, because once the tower goes up, that area is prohibited from building a habitable structure or business.
So that becomes like the baseline condition, and then subsequent development flows from that. Okay.
I'm sorry. Keep going.
Wait, I think I was doing questions, so other questions on the kind of the nuts and bolts?
Now, on the 3 additional spaces open here, I take it you sublet those to whoever it could be.
I'm assuming that would, yeah, that would be, part of the lease would be for the
It could be
space.
to like an AT&T, it could be
That's
to
right.
whoever, okay. So when you sublet those out, are you required to come back to the board?
So then you would have a new applicant that would come on, because it wouldn't be us, it would be, say, AT&T wanted to co-locate. They would file an application with the board to install antennas on an existing facility. It would probably be a little more straightforward process, because you're not making any changes to the ground. But they would require a permit from either the planning board or the code officer to install additional equipment on the tower. That's at least my understanding of how it would work.
All right, so you mentioned generators also. So you have a generator, they would require potential generators.
They
for
probably
their
would.
equipment.
Most of the time, a generator is part. Now, sometimes we can share the generator, so you can make some accommodations, but you don't really know until the new applicant co-locator comes a knocking and kind of asks you what you've got and what they need.
Question?
I'm sorry, the public session isn't open yet. It will be, but not at this point. Any other members of the board have some questions?
And then I should go through like RF and the visual, but this was just kind of on the site.
You still have quite a bit to go through.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's go through all of it
Okay.
before we open up the public session.
Great.
And then-
All right, if you go to tab H, another one of the things that we provided is the RF report that walks through the process of identifying the site, determining whether or not there are any existing structures, and then towards the back of the initial report, there are colored plot plans that show both existing and proposed coverage from the project. So these are the ones that are like this in green. There are two. One of them says at the top, existing and planned coverage. And then the next one shows what happens when we turn the site on. So this initial one shows the proposal out here on Eagle Mill Road. And obviously white areas are poor coverage, green areas are adequate coverage. This site is designed to tie into two towers in Wolfboro. 157 foot and looks like a 37 foot. It must be, is that a church?
No, it's a rooftop, there's a
Rooftop.
canister on the rooftop, and the 157 one is the one at Sugar Hill.
And so what this shows before is the coverage without the project, and then when you go to attachment B, it shows the change in coverage when we add the site. So it's not only providing coverage in the area where the tower is, but also critical coverage along Highway 109, including areas to the south where there's some significant residential development and people living there. So there's a lot in the report, but it basically boils down to two things. One, there were no existing structures that we could use in this area to put our antennas. No one has built a tower out there that we can use, nor is there any other existing structure that is tall enough. And then also, when the engineers decide the 130 feet, they're trying to do a couple of things. What you want when you get this site to communicate well with the two in Wolfboro is you want the antennas high enough that the coverage areas start to overlap, but that they don't overlap too much. Because if they're short, then you have drop calls in the middle. If they overlap, what happens is when you're in the overlap area, your phone doesn't know which tower to go for. It goes back and forth between the two, and it creates problems with the network, kind of drains it, makes it work worse. So even though under the ordinance and the FAA rules, in theory, you could bring a 190-foot tower, the height is really set at the right elevation to kind of meet those two goals, to connect the sites but not have too much overlap. Yes.
What have you seen for other opportunities for locations out there? Have you had other opportunities? Are there other locations that you've identified that were possible rather than this particular site?
Yeah, and this goes to Brian's job. So he's given a search ring that will kind of draw a circle around a portion of the net there. And then he needs to go interview landowners to see if someone is willing to host the tower. So It's not that this is the absolute only piece of property where this would work, but it needs to be kind of roughly in that area, both because of its kind of lateral proximity to the distance from the other towers, and the topography. And so, you know, this is a site that worked, that we had a landowner who was willing to do it and put those two together. And we have the site that we've chosen. You know, one of the challenges is that before we can come to you with an application, we need to have a lease or an agreement in place with a landowner who's willing to host the site. So the stuff that Brian does happens first. We have to make sure we find the property owner, and then we come to you with all the information.
So at this point, there's no other opportunities for you?
Not right now, no.
Okay.
And so the other thing that the site is doing, in addition to kind of adding green where there's white, is it's dealing with capacity. So the existing towers, because coverage is very poor here, have to work harder, because people will still be able to get a signal here and there, even in the white area, because they're taking the signal off of the other towers. But that makes those towers work more poorly. And when you go farther back and they start talking about sector footprints with the multicolored, that's what they're talking about there. Is this site will not only improve coverage where the tower is located, but it will help these other existing towers work better, because it will offload some of the capacity from those towers. One of the things that,
Just out of curiosity, did you guys look at Abenaki Tower?
Which one is where, what's the address?
It's on going on with Highway up by Melvin.
Long Beach area, just north of,
It's an existing tower with a ton of elevation.
just north of 20 Mile Bay.
No, that wasn't part of the search ring, so, we're particularly looking at this, you know, the Tufton Barneck area, as well as, you know, North Main Street in Wolfboro.
Might want to take a peek at it.
definitely what we'll do is we can talk, whenever this happens and there's like an alternative that people have questions about, we can have RF take a look at it and see, you know, why wasn't it in the search ring, and kind of be able to explain to everybody the thinking.
Well,
Question.
the public session isn't open yet, but it will be. We're gonna get through the application and assume jurisdiction on it. We'll open the public session.
The other bit of information that is, the ordinance requires is an assessment of the kind of amount of energy coming from the site. And as you've seen, there have been some folks that have raised questions about like the health effects of towers. And so cell phone carriers are governed by these emission standards set by the Federal Communication Commission that were originally done with EPA years ago. And so towards the back of this RF, there is a separate report, which is the MPE report, the maximum permissible energy that's permitted. And what they do is they figure out where on the face of the earth the energy level is greatest. And I think with this site, it's 131 feet away from the base of the tower. And then they assume there's no vegetation in the way or anything, and that all of the antennas are operating at their maximum design capacity and output. And the calculation that was done here shows that we're at about 2.1 or 2.2% of the allowable emissions under the FCC's rule. And that's at 131 feet. So this is a very, very low energy site. And it's well below the standards that govern us. And then, of course, by the time you move several hundred feet farther to abutting properties, that 2% number is going to be well under 1. So it's a very low energy site, but that's important information to ask for, and we've provided that to you folks as well. Moving to the visual simulation. So we did a balloon. Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
So, as I'm sure you know, none of us are RF engineers. And I think without question, though, I think the board should question the need, whether we should have a third-party RF engineer to review this, seeing as we know absolutely nothing about RF, which I'm sure you're quite used to.
Yes, and there's a guy, Ivan Pajacek, who has done consulting for Bar Harbor, Scarborough, he actually helped the town of Scarborough design its new wireless ordinance. I think he still operates out of Littleton. I think he's working with the town of Otisfield now. We have a project there. He may actually have other ideas if he's not available or not doing it anymore. So we could actually get you contact information if that would be helpful to Leanne.
The board actually had Donahue, Tucker, Ciradello, the board's firm.
Okay, great.
People they deal with. But if you can put forth names that you want, and if we have one in common, we will
Okay.
certainly go through. As you know, in the site plan review regulations, you have the privilege of paying for it.
Yes, we do.
I'm sure you're very accustomed to.
Yeah, and Ivan has actually done quite a bit of work kind of following us around in Maine, because you're right, I mean, I'm not an RF engineer either. I take Keith Valenti's work at his word, but we appreciate that sometimes you want another set of eyes on it.
But I think there's a legal question in here that will pertain to the RF engineer. And let me find it. Which is in the Tufton Borough zoning ordinance on how he looks at the RF. We talked about this briefly before the meeting. And this goes to the height, which, as you know, zoning we cannot change. But in E, in reviewing the site plan application, the planning board may allow an increase of up to 190 feet total, provided that based on the review of all the required submission data, a substantially better design will result from such increase, and the interests of the town will be better served. So I think the legal question for the RF engineer is, will the tower increase the interest of Tufton Borough? In other words, whether it increase the interest of Wolfboro, we have no interest.
Yep.
But whether it increase the interest of Tufton Borough. Now, I don't know the legal answer to that, but I think that legal question needs to be answered. And then that will direct the RF engineer in which direction he needs to look.
And, I think the point that's being made there is, do you need to go higher?
Correct.
Do you need to go more than, and then explain to the board why you need, did you look, because we did look at 88 feet, which would have been the 20-foot over average tree canopy height, and it didn't work at all. So I think we need to get you that information and have RF kind of explain why, 128, which is the center of these on a 130-foot tower, is the one that provides the best coverage at the lowest height, because that's the balance that I think,
And I really think the legality of that needs to be cleared up, because, and the reason I say that, if 128 improves for Wolfboro and 118 improves for Tufton Borough, I mean, we can't change the zoning. So what does that actually mean?
Okay.
And we'll put this to planning board council as well.
Okay, and we'll make sure that we look at the town issue and where I think actually, the greatest benefit to the increase in height that we're talking about is the area just south of 190 along the lake, where you've got significant residential development. When you do 88, that doesn't get any coverage at all. And then actually, if you go above 128 or 130, it doesn't really provide that much benefit. So this was the number that really made the difference for Tufton Borough, but we'll make sure we spell all that out.
Purely just reading the zoning and, and following it, so.
Great.
May I just say that this board is responsible to balance the interest of the residents of Tufton Borough, telecommunication provider, and its customers. So we're looking at the health and the safety, of the people of this town and its residents, all the residents. So we're going to ask a lot of these questions, I think, and the output of what Matt's talking about is important to us. We just mentioned about what other opportunities you have. It's important to us to understand whether there are better opportunities this town to put this tower than where it's being placed right here.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll continue to work our way down. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we have, and you probably have seen, we have done, since we filed the application, 2 new rounds of balloon tests. Those are for 2 other sites in Tufton Borough, each on town property, that are meant to kind of finish the coverage improvements that are associated with this project. So, there's an interest in addressing the need for improved coverage, but doing it in the way that you've noted that kind of balances impacts with improvement. So, I mean, pretty much all of the standards with your wireless ordinance are trying to strike that balance. How do we improve coverage, but do it in a responsible and reasonable way where you don't have too many towers and they're not any taller than they need to be? And we'll kind of pull all that together for you.
Appreciate that.
Does any other member of the board? Well, let's proceed to, what was it, aesthetics or balloon test?
Yeah, so the balloon test, we, if you turn to the last tab M of your packet, the ordinance requires us to do 3 days of balloon tests. I can't believe we didn't have wind issues, but it worked, and they were able to fly the balloon for the 14th, 15th, and 16th of February from 8 until 4. And so, any of you that saw the balloon flying, they raised the balloon. Important to note that the bottom of the balloon is the top of the tower, not the top of the balloon. It's a pretty big balloon, but it's the bottom of the balloon that represents the top of the tower. And so what Dewberry does is, after the balloon is up, they drive all the publicly accessible roads to see if the balloon is visible. And so they did 11 photographs of 11 different views. I think only 3 of them you could actually see the balloon. And we walked through each one of those. I think it was 5, 7, and 9, where the photo viewpoints where you could actually see the tower. And what they do is they show what the existing conditions are. Probably the best thing to do is if you just go to photo number 5.
One moment.
Sure.
Actually, just for the audience, what I did is I pulled 9 out of the book.
Oh, just circle out, right. And so for many of the locations, the tower isn't visible. Part of that is because there's just a tremendous amount of forest cover in Tuftonboro. And at 130 feet, it's much less visible than a kind of a standard 190 foot. But photo 5, it says actual view at the top. Shows, you can see kind of faintly in the gap that they picked between the trees, the red balloon floating over the tree line. And then there are 2 simulations that they add. They go back, they remove the balloon, and they put in a simulation of a flat gray monopole tower, your standard cell phone tower. And then the next simulation was the so-called monopine. That's when they have dark green branches that are used to hide the antennas at the top. 130 is about the kind of tipping point where monopines become obnoxious if they're taller. If you do 160-foot monopine, it looks like, you know, an enormous green mass well above the tree canopy. At 100 feet, they work very well. 130 is kind of, so the balloon is right there, that little red speck right
I
there.
can't tell it's
I
red.
think the next page,
It says
Photo
probably
5A.
5A.
if you go to 5B, you'll see they've put an arrow to it.
Then there's an arrow pointing to the galvanized tower on 5B. And then when you flip to 5C, that shows you the monopine.
I
So-
see that.
So this was the one, now, you know, if you come to this site after this is built and you look up at the tree line, you probably have no idea that that's a cell phone tower. That's the benefit of the monopine. In some of the subsequent simulations in 7 and 9, when you're looking across the lake, it actually makes the tower a little more visible when it's dark green at the top than if it was galvanized. So, you know, but this is kind of like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's important for the board to take a look at the sims and give some thought and consideration to what you think the impacts are, and then what the difference is between the pole and the pine tree.
So which are you proposing?
We're proposing the pole,
The pole.
but we know that you've got some inquiries from some of the abutters and residents about what the pine tree option looks like, so we wanted to provide you with a simulation showing you both. The monopine works really well if you're going to be able to see the project from abutting properties. Because if you're looking through a lot of existing vegetation and you see one that looks like a tree, it will often blend in because the site angle is very steep and you've got a lot of foreground vegetation. When you saw on 7 and 9 and you're farther away, a couple miles away, and you're looking, at the line of trees. A model pine will tend to stick out because it's darker, but we wanted to provide you with stems for both, so you can see
Good. The canopy of the wooded area there, which is, you're at the top of that. I think some people are kind of confused about what the canopy is. It noted, I think, it's 68 feet average.
Mhm.
Okay, so it's not necessarily 68 feet, it's an average of low and high.
That's
All
correct.
right, so do you know what the high number was and the low number?
I'm trying to think, we have
So
that.
people
in the site
understand
plan.
that area, when the bloom's up in that area, I believe it was like to the top of the trees. And it really didn't seem to exceed it much when I viewed it, so.
And so on sheet Z3, it shows the survey that we did, and it's done within 150 feet of the model pine center. And then we have to measure certain trees that meet the threshold. But I don't think the heights are on the, are they?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so it just said what type of tree and then the height of it. So it's RO 70, RO 50, RO 65. You can see the heights of all the trees.
It's hard to read, it's quite faint. And actually, I think it helps to turn it sideways. But you're right, there is some variability, and the ordinance requires us, for that 20-foot standard, you have to take the average within 150 feet of certain tree sizes, and then that becomes the number that the 20 feet is measured from.
Yeah, if I recall, it was, the bloom was barely up over the top of those trees in that particular area. So I guess the next question would be too, if you're doing the chain link fence in the area 50 by 80, how many of those trees have to come?
Not a lot. You can see from the tree diagram, there are some that are within the box lease area. Normally, we clear just what's necessary to install the fence, so we may not go to the full 80 by 80. But most of the vegetation was actually outside that dash box, and you know, the vegetation, if you go back to that shot 5, the vegetation in that photo simulation 5 that is blocking most of the tower is not the vegetation on site. It's vegetation right on the other side of that view. So that's why we like to do the sims, because vegetation close by and far away from the site provides buffering, you know, depending on the viewer's location. So the sims are much more helpful, I think. The last piece that we have really is talking about the height in the waiver section.
If we could, one moment.
Yeah,
I know the board, we were aware of the balloon test day. How many of the board were able to drive around and take a look?
You know what?
Drive around on the balloon test day.
I went out in the lake.
You went out in the lake, I drove around. You
I
guys
walked
went-
up to it.
You walked up to it.
I didn't notice it from any other place really, other than.
I drove Eagle Mere Road, I couldn't see it. I drove Cross Neck Road, I couldn't see it. I drove 109, I couldn't see it.
Right. No, I couldn't either. That was it.
I couldn't see it from along the shore. I was probably 40 feet out from shore on my snowshoes. I think if I'd gone further out, I would have seen
I
it.
think for sure, if you went out for a week.
and that the view 9 shows from across the lake looking back.
Yeah.
It's a little farther than if you were halfway across the lake. That gives you a sense of visibility.
I will say, I think you guys, as far as trying to take photos and find the areas, you know, where, I mean, you called me multiple times to
Yep.
see areas where you should go to take photos, and, you know, I think you followed up on any suggestion I had, so I will say you guys seem very proactive with trying to get a wide network.
Yeah, I also, you know, we have Dewberry, who does very good work, but I was also on site 2 of 3 days and drove for a few hours each of those days around the area. And from my naked eye, the only one I was able to see was the one, was the 5A, 5B was the only one I was able to see. I went over to Guilford and with the naked eye, I couldn't see it.
It was reported that somebody saw it from the pine cone, but when I drove there, I wasn't able to see it, but it could be the light. I mean,
It's still a good little distance.
it's quite
Hard
hard
to see it.
I was standing on the abutting property, and I could sort of see it, but it was very masked by the other trees.
The last piece that we had was a walkthrough, in a little bit more detail of waiver standards, but I think probably the best thing to do is for us to incorporate that into a little more information from our RF engineers about the height, and we can just include that. It's all fascinating legal discussion, but probably better to turn it open to the public and get to their thoughts.
We're more accustomed to the fascinating legal discussions than we would like to do. The only other request I would have on the waivers is if you could put all of your waivers onto one sheet.
Okay.
It just makes it simpler as far as going through everything and trying to find them when this is all said and done.
All right, we'll do.
Any other members of the board have any questions? Leanne, just so I get this right, this would be the appropriate time to assume jurisdiction?
If you feel that it's complete, yes, it is.
The application seems to be complete. Can I have a motion to assume jurisdiction over the application? Remember, this is a roll call vote.
So moved.
Second.
Tony Creole.
Derek Ross, second.
Carol Bush in favor.
Marcus, and yes.
George Maynard, yes.
Kate Nesbitt, I'm recusing myself because I'm in a butter.
Matt Young, yes.
Gary Claude, yes.
Just so we're clear, everyone, what we're doing is not a vote about the application. It's that the application is complete and we are assuming jurisdiction over the application. So with that, we are going to open up the public session. I remind everyone to please note your name and your address very clearly, because as we know, it's mass and such and so forth. And keep in mind the reminders we had at the beginning of the meeting about politeness and such and so forth. So, with that, who would like to speak? Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask some questions. I hope you can.
Introduce yourself first.
Yeah, I'm Charlie Hayes. I live down on Eaglemere Road. Family's been there since 1904, and so it's pretty important to us. I'd like to know how many different sites on Tuftonboro Neck did you look at and get approval for other than this one?
Do you want us to
Typically
take,
the board.
Answer the question.
Hold on.
do you want us to jump in or do you want to recognize?
You can answer it,
I'm
within
asking questions
Yeah.
to them because I don't think these people are.
This is the only site on Tuftonboro Road where we have a leak, so this is the only one that we have to proceed.
And no others are available. The reason is because it seems to me that the height of your tower is important for reception. And if you drive farther out Tuftonboro Neck, it is much higher in elevation, which could give you probably the same coverage with a much smaller, less obtrusive site. Did you look at any other sites on Tuftonboro Neck and talk with the owners besides this one?
So I'm not sure if there was anybody else.
Yes, I did speak with other owners on Tuftonboro Neck, and
Any
I did.
farther out where the elevation is much higher, where you could have put a smaller tower?
Where do you mean?
Well, if you go out Tuftonboro Neck, it's probably 100, 150
You
feet.
mean like Cross Neck Road or?
Yeah, right near Cross Neck Road, yes.
Top of the hill farm.
And
My Point Farm.
And it is substantially higher elevation, which means it could put a lower tower and be less intrusive. There are less trees to cut down. That's what I want to know. What other sites did you look at? And
Mr.
talk to
Hayes,
the owners about.
Mr. Hayes, but we don't have an application for another site. We only have the application for this one.
Because this is the only one
This
that's
is the
able
one
to.
they brought forward. And part of what we'll do with the RF engineer, the third party, is he will look at other, one of the things they'll do is look at other sites that may already exist, if there's a tower or something, and make sure that what they're proposing is actually necessary.
Just the other thing that's helpful to understand is that when the topography changes, sometimes you can do, if it goes up, sometimes you can do a shorter tower, but it depends how far that moves the tower away from the towers you're trying to connect.
A mile.
And then the other issue with changing the base elevation is it's really the antenna elevation that the RF engineers, so if you went up 50 feet, you might be able to reduce the height of the tower by 50 feet, but the antennas will be at the same elevation. So when you go around town and across the lake and you look over, the antennas will be at the same height because you can't see the base. So that's why we try to give you, both the RF information and the SIMs, because it's really hard to just say, okay, if you moved uphill, that would necessarily be lower visual impact. It might be shorter, but it might be worse depending on the vegetation surrounding the abutters, and so there's a couple of variables to think
So
about.
when we hire a third-party engineer, an RF engineer, so what happens is the board goes out, so they present information saying, this is what it is, and this is why we need it. And this is why it meets the zoning. And then the board goes out, and we're going to hire our own RF engineer, which they'll pay for. But the board, that engineer's loyalty is to the board, to the town of Tufton Borough. And they will review what they're saying we need this, and this makes the zoning, it makes it okay in the zoning for this reason. And they will confirm that it is accurate, or they will say it is not. And if they don't meet the requirements, then it does not get approved. If the engineer says, yes, they are correct, for whatever reasons, then we continue.
I'm trying to understand if they had other viable options with approval from the owners other than this one. Because there are other sites on the net which are better suited for towers of a shorter height to give them the same communications capability. And that's why I wonder if you had other options.
Yeah, we do.
Approved options from owners.
Yeah, we do. This is the only approved option that we have right now.
Okay, well, that says a lot. It says that you haven't done your homework yet. Go ahead. That's all.
Yes, sir, name and address.
My name is Ron Buell, neighbor of Mr. Hayes here at 11 Eagle Mere South. And my family's been out there since, I think, 39. I actually have 3 questions. I don't know if you'll let me put them all together or not. First one is, how many Verizon customers in Tufton Borough will benefit this versus how many Verizon customers in Wolfboro? Because this is, a Tufton Borough location. I am a Verizon customer. I have 4 out of 5 bars at our place on Eagle Mere South. I keep my, for me personally, I am able to keep my signal all the way to the fire station where it drops until I get past the church. Either way on 109, I'm fine. And I'm okay losing that small piece of service. So first question is, does this really benefit Tufton Borough or does this benefit Wolfboro? Second of all, I noticed you're only applying for 4G and not for 5G. 5G is the basic state-of-the-art communications protocol for cellular communications today. And also has very questionable health and safety risks that are still somewhat unknown right now. And I've been through a similar process in a different location with 5G. So what are your plans to potentially upgrade from 4G to 5G, and would that upgrade have to go through this board? So that actually maybe is a question for yourselves. And third question is kind of tied into the first one, which is what you had mentioned. The 130-foot tower serves Wolfboro and Tufton Borough. Would a lower tower better serve just Tufton Borough?
Yeah, so I can take a crack at the three, and Mr. Chairman, if you want to jump in number two. So most of the improvements, the search area and the coverage deficiency is all in Tufton Borough. I think you can see in the plots in the RF that the great majority, if not nearly all of the benefit, is in the town of Tufton Borough. I appreciate the planning board's comment about they have a standard where they're looking to balance the interests of the residents. So we'll try to parse that out. But this is primarily for Tufton Borough. It is, of course, the case that cell phone signals don't recognize municipal boundaries. And so to the extent you have good coverage now, that's coming from towers in Wolfboro. And so, you know, we try, I mean, my experience has been that most towers are in the towns where they serve. But there's certainly some bleed over and you know, but we'll parse that out with the RF. You know, I think it's fair just to understand that other towns are hosting towers that help your residents, and there may be some spillover, but we'll parse that out. These are 4G antennas. As far as this team knows, we don't know if they're going to go to 5G or when. It has been an interesting experience to see how 5G has expanded in Maine. Certainly in like Portland, Augusta, there's efforts. But I live in Bath, and for some completely unknown reason, we have 5G. I think it's because of the shipyard. So, you know, it's kind of happening where they make the investments. The antennas are different. So if we didn't have to come back to the planning board, we definitely have to go back to the code officer, because you don't just change the signal, you've got to remove the antennas and they'd be different. So I'm assuming it would be an amendment to a site plan review, and then the code officer would have to decide. But there would be some municipal review of the installation of new equipment. And I think on the tower height issue, the chair has kind of flagged a legal test. There's a balance, and we're going to need to identify the Tufton Borough piece of this tower, and we'll do that in the next round.
Thank you.
In response to the zoning, as far as switching from a 4G to a 5G, I've never read anything in the zoning that would say if you were to switch bandwidth on a telecommunications tower, that you would be required to come back. Now, there may be some FCC something somewhere, but as far as what we have, there's nothing.
Might be something you want to revisit at a different meeting around your
ready for that?
The thing about 5G, what I understand, and you might know better, Scott, Brian, that the repeaters are more often than not, okay? And we have discussed it at the board, and we have yet to, with the COVID that came in, we were just starting that, we've been out of it. So we're going to go back to it because we're not sure how it would affect the town overall. Whether we're going to see a lot of repeaters in a lot of different places, or do they get the technology down to the point where that one tower would handle it for a lot of, the technology is changing very quickly. 2-3 years ago, and you might see them on every telephone pole. So I don't think you see that today, but from what I've read and understand, the attorneys that represent this group are very big in telecommunications, so it'll be on our agenda, I'm sure.
Cool, thank you.
Hold on, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Hayes, let's let everyone else speak, and then.
All right, go ahead.
Yes, sir.
My name's Hugh Mitchell. I'm part of the Hayes Cartel on Eagle Mirror South. I'm at 6 Higgs Lane. And I like your idea about having them look into Abenaki Tower, because the distance from here to out on Tufton Borough Neck is about the same, maybe even less, as far as putting a tower out there. And now we have the elevation, and probably serve Tufton Borough a little better than out on Tufton Borough Neck. You talked about impact as far as the animals you study. You talked about a bat. What about hummingbirds? We get a lot of hummingbirds that come through here, and we have a lot of eagles out on the neck here, and I'm concerned about that too. And that's all I say.
Wes, you had something earlier?
I was just wondering about the size of the generator. We have a few generators that are large. This doesn't sound like this is going to be a very large generator. today.
I'm sorry, Wes, one thing though. Wes Burke and your address.
18 Thomas Point.
Thank you.
Sorry.
30 kW.
What is it?
30 kW.
30, that's pretty good size for,
Is that generator fully insulated?
Yes,
Okay, so it's quite different than a home generator.
yeah.
And
It's
there's,
raised up slightly and has a sound attenuating enclosure around it.
and being a 30 kW, it's probably a liquid cooled, which are quite a bit quieter than the air cooled. So I think 20 kW is like.
I think that's right.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I don't know what you're.
Hold on, Mr. Hayes.
Great.
Hi there, we're Keith and Sherry Hoover, 89 Tufton Road. And just jotted, you know, just why we're concerned. We are extremely concerned about the plans for the construction of this tower within 1,000 feet of our residence. Looking at the map, it appears to be about 900 feet straight behind our house, which is within the commonly cited quarter-mile parameter for safety. My 12-year battle with cancer has taken me to facilities in Colorado, Germany, Boston, Sarasota, not to mention here in New Hampshire, in Concord and in Portsmouth. I've been to conventional clinics and hospitals. Some have been alternative and some have been integrated, seeking the best of both worlds. And one thing I've learned is that an individual's susceptibility to cancer is based not only on genetics. There are many factors that work together to weaken us, from subtle food sensitivities, stress and worry, to toxins in our food and environment, and more. I was taught by educated doctors that EMF exposure is hazardous and contributes to the weakening of the human body. Also, according to an article on the FCC.gov website, in 2011, the World Health Organization classified radio frequencies as a Class 2B carcinogen. If this proposed tower is built, my wife and I must seriously consider selling the home that we have lived in for 34 years as of next month, the home we raised our children in, and had planned to retire in. Further, we do not know how the presence of this tower could affect the market value of our home, as I know for many this is a serious concern. We humbly beseech the board to consider to err on the side of caution for the sake of Tufton Borough residents. There are many Tufton Borough residents who would be in an area of high exposure and potential risk near this tower. Please give this your serious consideration, and for this we are sincerely grateful.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Hayes, you're back up.
I just want to know how many different sites on Tufton Road next did you review and get approval?
I think we've already been through this one.
No,
This is the only one that they have approved.
Yeah, this is the only one that.
The only one.
The only one.
I wonder why.
Hugh Mitchell,
Name and address again, I'm
Hugh
sorry.
Mitchell, 6 Heads Lane.
Yes, sir.
They were talking about a generator. Are they diesel powered or natural gas?
This is diesel.
Diesel.
Okay. Another concern.
Question. Jared Burke, 18 Thomas Point in Wolfboro. I had a question. I forgot my question. It's would there ever be a possibility of redoing the balloon test for more in the summer or when more people are around the area?
They're not required to, no.
Okay. If it did happen, or if it was delayed, could it happen again where they do the balloon test again, or?
They're not required to, no.
Okay.
I mean, if they wanted to do it for fun, they could, but I highly doubt they're gonna do that. Anyone else?
I have a question. Scott or Brian? I don't know if you can answer this. You can tell us about the safety factor of the emitting of the towers, studies. What do they tell us? What do they tell you? What do you tell the public?
Yeah, so the way this works is, and you saw some folks send something in about studies from 2004 in Saudi Arabia and a bunch of stuff. So what the FCC did in the Telecommunications Act, which is the federal law that kind of governs this mixed permitting for towers, where some of it's done by the feds and some of it is done by municipalities. They tried to figure out how to balance who was going to review what. And so this issue about health effects came up early on when cell towers were being constructed. And so what the Telecommunication Act says is that all of the carriers have to go through the process of complying with the MPE emission standards that the FCC sets. And the gentleman's absolutely right. This stuff, you know, when it comes to the people that install the equipment, when we have people that go on the towers to service it, you can't go to the top of a cell phone tower while it's on and start swapping out antennas or fixing bolts. It's not safe to be that close to the antenna. What happens though is the energy dissipates incredibly fast. So what you see at this site is if these antennas are on, you couldn't send a worker to the top of the tower. But at 131 feet away with the antennas on, the worker could stand there and would only be receiving about 2% of the amount that's allowed under the rules. So it drops off incredibly fast. Also, there are microwave emissions that come from televisions and remote controls and microwave ovens and refrigerators and all the stuff that we have in our houses too. So it's all based on the kind of wavelength which determines the amount of energy. So what the feds did was they said towns can make sure all of their cell phone tower companies comply with these rules. You've got to provide the information like we've done. You'll probably have a third-party review of the way we did it to make sure we've got the right number. And you can even put a condition of approval that it be kind of updated and tested after it's constructed. But what the Fed said was because there was no indication that, you know, when you got in a distance from these towers, it was an issue, they made it illegal for towns to use concerns about health effects as a citing, which is why you don't have a standard in the ordinance that says, you know, provided that you find that the health effects are reasonable or acceptable. And that's because the Fed said, we're going to set the standard and enforce it. Municipalities, you can ask, but you can't use concerns about health effects as a citing guideline.
Similar to the fact we can't turn down an application based on traffic flow on a state highway.
Exactly, yeah, so it's a preemption at the federal level. But, you know, I hate saying that because nobody likes being told what they can't do, but which is why we give you the data on the levels. The energy coming from your phone is significant. And improving the coverage actually ramps down the power coming out of your phone, which is good. And this is a very, very low energy site. And by the time you get to the property line, the levels are going to be well below. And I'll see if we can actually get, you know, what's the level at 900 feet, or, you know, and get you some additional information. Because when we first started doing these projects like 12, 15 years ago, all the sites were in the high 20s and low 30s, but I haven't seen a site over 10% in 5 years, and I think it's just a different wavelength, it's a lower energy, so it's a very, very low energy site.
So the closest property line is 390 feet?
Yeah, so at 130, we're at 2%. At 200, it's probably 1.1%. At 300, it's probably 0.8%. It drops off really quick. And I'll see if we can get an estimate. It'll be kind of based on some assumptions because they can't take topography in it. But we're talking about really, really small numbers and now fractions of small numbers.
Yeah, if we could see that at the property line numbers. Distances. Just some nut and bolt things. What's the approach to this? How's this proposed to look as far as the road itself? Because that's, you know, you're cutting in a fairly decent sized road.
Oh, down by the kind of curb cut up by the road?
Yep.
Our easement corridor, I should clarify that somebody had asked about the lease area. The road is an easement. I think Z4 shows the detail down by the road of the approximate, at least the curb cut within the right of way. So there's some grading that takes place within the right of way, but then it comes down pretty quickly. It's a 12-foot wide road, and we're in a 20-foot corridor, so we can't do anything outside of the 20-foot easement corridor. No clearing of vegetation. no, you know, with the exception of the level spreaders that are shown on the plan, everything has to happen within the 20 feet.
This is a fairly rural country, actually it's more of a camp road. So how are you proposing to have it actually look?
Well,
I mean, you can make it look nice, or you can make it, you know,
I
you
mean,
can make
there-
it look like a utility road.
the default would be, you know, crushed gravel meeting up with Eaglemere Road, and that would be it. You know, some grading for that, but no signage, no other improvements to that area. But if that was an issue, you know, we'd be interested in thoughts and concerns.
Well, I always think it's important, and that this has always been important to the board, when you have something that's going on into an area, that it matches the area.
Mhm.
And while certainly by the balloon test, it was somewhat difficult to see, I think it would be appropriate that you present something that matches. Tom, that section normally has very nice gates, and
Mm-hmm.
it makes it look like an old farm. I would propose you bring something that makes it look as such at the end of the road.
Something kind of consistent with the neighborhood and other driveway connections.
Yep.
Maintain the rural flavor.
And then utility-wise, what are you guys proposing?
This is underground utilities,
Overhead.
Oh, it's overhead
Yep.
until we get back to this site, so overhead utilities within the 20-foot easement order.
Now, how does the board feel about overhead utilities versus underground, at least at the opening, of course? And the reason I say that is, it has nothing to do with the utilities themselves, but when you're dealing with a pole, when you have overhead utilities, you have to cut a hole through the canopy for the pole versus buried utilities, at least at the beginning, you do not. Something just to think about. So. All right, keep going.
Well, and another issue with overhead as opposed to buried utilities is reliability when when there's wind and storm events and that sort of thing. So I know you've got it covered with battery backup and generators, but to have a tree come down and take your power line out on your access road, just easy thing to prevent by not having it up there in the.
A lot of times it's underground, it's probably not underground in this one because of the length of the road. I mean, sometimes, the short one we're doing in Otisfield is all underground because it's only 26 feet.
I don't, aesthetically speaking, I don't think it would need to accomplish, canopy protection. I don't think it would need to be the entire length. I think that the end, which is usually, anybody remember when New Hampshire Electric
You
gets
take
it?
the first 200 feet, you want to see it
Yeah,
underground, and then you can bring it up.
That way, if the tree canopy falls in and you can't see anything, unless you wanted to for a reliability standpoint, bury it the entire way. I think just from an aesthetic standpoint, having the utility buried at the end will give a much better overall, for the road itself.
Yeah, I see we're tying into a line on the other side of the road, so we can take, this is it's a good question of, what's the entrance gonna look like, all in? Vegetation clearing, utility lines, is there gonna be fence, curb cut, and so we can give a little more thought to how it might look and how other driveways look and have a kind of a package for you to think about.
Correct.
Okay.
In other words, it would be nice if it looked nice.
And the fact that we're running a gravel road makes it easier if you want to bury the power coming from across the road.
They would probably want to drop their pole on the other side and then drop it down.
Yeah, that's my guess.
So it looks like it's not going straight in, so when you're standing on Eaglemere at the entrance, you're not gonna be able to look straight down and see the pole.
It curves.
It
curves.
So it looks like there's another road that maybe comes
So
off
that might
to
be
the right.
nice for the residents, they wouldn't really see it from the road.
I don't believe you would ever, from that road, if you had the utilities buried for the first couple hundred feet, I don't think you would see that pole. I don't think you'd ever see it.
Yeah.
From that road, from the end of that road. Based on what I saw with the road test driving by and stuff, things like that.
Just a quick question.
Name and address. And
Ron Buell, 11 Eagle Mere South. I actually did review the application from cover to cover. It was thorough, thank you. One thing I didn't see is what is the maximum gust of wind that tower can handle at the top?
Yeah, so,
We get microbursts and
Yeah.
stuff out there, you get 100-mile-an-hour winds.
so this is designed not only to deal with the wind, but also ice loading and wind at the same time. So, I mean, at 130 feet, they just tend to be tougher than the 190s. And so they're designed, I don't know, you know, the one on top of Sugarloaf finally went down a year or so ago, but, you know, they just replaced it with another lattice tower that, you know, halfway through the winter, you can't see metal. And it's completely encased in rime ice, and I don't even think about the winds are up there. So they're usually over-engineered for stuff like that. But then you've got the fall zone with the things. And as Brian mentioned, you know, even if they're not designed to buckle in the middle, they buckle. I mean, the top gets blown, and if there's ever an issue, the big issue actually with the fall zone is less of the tower falling and more of ice being blown off as it gets warm and the wind picks up. And so a lot of times the fall zones are just, that's why sometimes you'll see that 125 or 150% of the tower height. They're just trying to kind of cover that. So.
It was really just, I'm an engineer, so I was curious.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I have another question for you. I don't know if you guys ever done this evaluation, Verizon, whatever, but detriment to property values in the vicinity. Have you ever looked at it? Has Verizon looked at it and understand what a tower does?
I mean, this comes up a lot. I don't think Verizon has done its own assessment, but it's kind of like a pool. Some people like in-ground pools, some people hate them, and it can affect the property value. Some people, for a lot of folks, a poor cell phone service is a detriment. People that want to work from home, or you know, they want to have one phone, and so improvements in cell phone coverage can improve it a little bit, I suppose, in theory, on a person-by-person basis. But certainly, if you have a tower that's looming over your neighbor and they're going to be staring right at it, that probably is not going to, you know, that some people may be turned off by it. It's really hard because essentially the question is, if you know the zoning kind of says what you can do, and so long as you meet the standards, everybody would rather live next to conservation land than, you know, a 12-lot subdivision or something else. But that's not really the point. It's, you know, how do we make sure we do this in a way that it's away from the property lines, it's as low as it can be, and there's enough buffering so that you minimize any of the negative effects while still getting the benefit. So I think the hope is that if you do it right, it's not going to adversely impact anybody's property values. And may have.
I had some interesting insight on that, on property values with cell towers in two different ways. One was many years ago they were putting in a cell tower on County Road in Melvin Village, which Melvin Village is it's a cranky place. So you can imagine the meeting was pretty contentious. And there was a gentleman who was at every meeting, and the cell tower was going across the street from his house. So, and he decided he was going to sell his house. The meeting, I think the tower was built at that point. And he put his house up, I think it was $699. It was a beautiful house on the left-hand side, and Eddie Hodgkin built it. But, and it sold in about 2 days. So, it was, and this was not in a booming economy. This was an interesting time. I think you're right that given a choice, no one wants a cell tower next to their house versus conservation land. Anyone who said they did would be kind of foolish. But another friend of mine was just moving to this area. He's in insurance, nuclear insurance, and they were looking at houses. And they walked away from houses based on, because he has to do Zoom meetings constantly, based on internet access and cell phone reception. So it definitely gets you both ways, you know. So it's a fact of life nowadays.
I agree. I'm sorry, I still have
Name and address again.
trying to
Mr.
get an
Hayes.
answer to my question. Is this the
Name,
only
Mr.
site
Hayes, name and address again, please.
I'm sorry, Charles Hayes. I live on 1 Hayes Camp Road right off Eaglemere on the lake. Is this the only site for which you could get approval on Tufton Neck?
Yes.
only site on the whole neck where you could get owner approval.
This is the only site where we have a lease, correct?
Only site on Tuftonboro Neck that you could get a lease to put a tower. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you went through this exercise for years and years and years and asked everybody, that's not how the process normally goes. So we get a site, a search ring, as Brian noted, that tells him where he has to find a site. And then he goes looking for a site that's got decent access, and, you know, this has a kind of a woods road, that there already been, you know, there was some clearing, and so, and then you have to find someone who's willing to take the call. Some people never call Brian back, some people say no right away, and so he works as diligently as he can to find someone to host the site. We know that this site meets the coverage objectives.
Are there other sites that met the coverage objectives?
Mr. Hayes, this is the only application we have.
Yeah, I
And
know,
they-
I
and they
know,
will-
but
and
what
they
I'm
will-
getting at is I'm not
and-
sure they did their homework.
And they're required to look at other existing facilities
Did
that
they?
might work. And the third-party engineer that the planning board will hire, that they will pay for, will review the existing facilities, meaning the other existing towers in the area, and see if they will work. They're not under an obligation to prove that there is no other single piece of raw dirt in the giant area that would work, that they haven't knocked on the door.
And the board is, the Tuftonboro board is happy with that.
The Tuftonboro board has an application before them, and we're going to review the application, but it's for this piece of land.
I guess my question is, did they do their homework?
I would assume, since they're spending a very large amount of money to attempt to put this tower there.
It's
that they
peanuts
have.
to them. It's peanuts in the grand scheme of things to them financially.
This is the application we have for this tax parcel, and this is the application we will review. Any other people, any other members of the public like to speak?
Yes, it's very simple here.
Name and address.
Yes, I'm sorry, Sherry Hoover, 89 Tuftonboro Neck Road. There are so many things that I would like to say, but I've boiled it down to this. As my husband has stated, our concern is not how well it will be seen or not. And I understand that this will not be settled tonight, so I'm simply asking that each member of the planning board please do your own research on the safety or lack thereof of the construction of this tower to surrounding Tuftonboro residents.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak? Are there any members of the board who have any more questions? Okay. We had quite a bit of written correspondence, and many of them made a request that they be read into the minutes. So this is going to take a little while. But we're going to honor their requests. You guys already have copies, I think, of all of these, unless there's something in here that came in last minute.
Yes, Leanne sent us everything, I think.
So this is probably going to take about 10 minutes, guys. So bear with me. I may have to hand this out, but I'll leave these. So, Joan Hodges, dear planning board members, I am hoping that you would carefully consider the concerns of those abutting the proposed cell tower construction on Tuftonboro Neck before granting a permit for construction. Although we all love to have better cell phone service, not at the expense of our neighbors' good health. When I first heard about this proposal, I was excited to think that at long last I would have a reliable service from my Union Brook Road home. But through the years, I've heard reports of health impacts on those living and working near these structures. So I decided to do my own research. Perhaps the new structures had eliminated earlier problems. Perhaps those earlier reports have been invalidated. Unfortunately, what I discovered in my nosing around online was not reassuring. While the American Cancer Society states at this time there's no strong evidence that exposure to RF waves from cell phone towers cause any noticeable health effects, June 1st, 2020, there actually is considerable research from around the world indicating adverse health effects on those living and working within a quarter mile of the cell phone towers currently in use. The medical group Physicians for Safe Technology states on their website, mdsafetech.org/cell-tower-health-effects. And there is some articles associated with it. If anyone would like to see the articles, they're available in the public record at the town hall, so I'm not going to read the entire articles. Though the planning board has received copies of all of those. Let's see, Rebecca Wright. Proposed installation of telecommunications facility for 20 Eaglemere Road. Dear Chairman and board members, I own property on Backlanders Road off of Eaglemere Road. My property is approximately 800 feet from, and I am concerned about potential negative health effects caused by the cell tower and the negative visual impact. The Verizon proposal lists 800 residents and 140 workers who would potentially benefit from the proposal. And I'm sorry that it cut off the portion of the email on the copy. Proposal is the actual number of people who would see an improvement in their cellular service, a small market share of those people with cell phones. 31% of 940 is 291. Some of those 940 work better with their cell service, B, with the installation of the tower. The Verizon website shows Tufton Borough having full 4G LTE service coverage. People whose service would be theoretically improved or in a different area. How much better will their service be? In addition, even after installation of the proposed tower, if I'm understanding, are significant segments of Tufton Borough Neck that are designated as having coverage gaps. Has the planning board distributed antenna systems to better cover those gap areas without the prospect of an unsightly tower? I would feel better about the issue of negative visual impact of the tower. Had there been a video of the proposal rather than cherry-picked photos? Is there a video? No, I don't believe there is. Are there any data of the effectiveness of a 110-foot tower or a 90-foot tower? Have these alternatives been explored? Has there been or will there be independent verification of the RF exposure data provided by the applicant? Thank you for consideration of this matter. Rebecca Wright. Carol Benz. I requested this email be read into the minutes of the meeting as I am unable to attend in person. After reviewing some of the research regarding radiation from cell phone towers, I am concerned about the research does not seem to be definitive. I do wonder if it is wise to continue with this project. I believe possible health ramifications should be studied before a decision is made, if it should turn out that there are health hazards as well. Carol Benz, I wanted to share updated plans and the stormwater report that was received today. Oh, sorry, that was Leanne sending that to you.
Matt, is there any way you can move that microphone closer to you, because the people are stating that they can't, that you're muffled? Or you're 6 feet apart, if you could take off your mask maybe and see.
I'm guessing it might have something to do with the mask.
Yeah, it's been an issue the whole time, so.
I'm dear Chairman and board members, I'm a seasonal resident of number 9. This is from Rosa 9. I'm a seasonal resident of number 9 Eaglemere Road South. My family acquired our property. It's cut off here. And I've been coming to the lake most years ever since. We are part of the Hayes Camp, which has been our retreat for over 100 years. It is one of the few original family camps remaining around the lake. I have seen comments others have made about the adverse effects of the presence of the tower. I will leave the science of that up to others who possess more technical knowledge than I. However, I am strongly opposed to the tower, although I do not object to advancing technology at any cost. In my opinion, this would be the beginning of the commercialization of Eaglemere Road in particular. Also, it is my understanding that the tower will indeed, can't get that part. I apologize, this is ended the words are cut off from my new copies. Do you have a full one? So I can...
Yep.
I'm trying to get the gist of it from the end ones, but I don't want to miss it.
She's referring to the fact that it'll be open for other cell phone providers to put more antennas up there.
Okay. Let me go with this one again, just so I get this right. I'm a seasonal resident at number 9 Eaglemere Road South. My family acquired our property in the early 1900s and been coming to the lake most years ever since. We are part of the Hayes Camp, which has been a much beloved and treasured retreat for over 100 years. It is one of the few original family camps remaining around the lake these days. I have seen comments others have made about the adverse effects of the presence of a cell tower on Tufton Borough Neck. I will leave the science up to others who possess more technical knowledge than I. However, I am strongly opposed to the tower. Although I do not object to advancing technology, I do not believe it is doing so at any cost. In my opinion, this would be the beginning of the commercialization of Tufton Borough Neck in general, and Eaglemere Road in particular. Also, it is my understanding that the tower will indeed rise far above the tree line on the proposed site, and according to the schematic drawings, it appears that there will be room for additional clients, servers, communication devices on this tower. To me, that feels like a slippery slope. We all cherish the serene character of Tufton Borough Neck year-round and summer residents alike. This tower feels like a significant intrusion into a place where many have found retreat in nature and some peace in our otherwise ever chaotic world. Thank you for all your careful consideration of this important matter. This is something that once done cannot be undone. I respectfully request that my email be read into the minutes of April 1st, 2021 meeting. Sincerely, Rosa Hayes, number 9 Eaglemere Road South. Elizabeth Corning, 15 Eaglemere Road South. Dear Sirs, rather assumptive, I am writing to state my opposition to the proposed cell tower at 20 Eaglemere Road. My family, Buell Corning, have been taxpayers on Eaglemere South, formerly also Eaglemere, since 1946. Cell towers have only been around for less than 25 years. Their long-term effects on people are not known. Any effects from 5G tech, both short or long-term, are not known. Any technologies to come to our backyard and their effects on people are also unknown. We value our property, our health, and that of our children, grandchildren, and generations to come. This will also be an eyesore and may mar the gorgeous views from the lake forever. I don't want to see the neck tarnished by this unnecessary eyesore that may cause health problems in the future. Thank you for your consideration. This one is from Mr. Hoover. So let's see if I'm getting it right, Mr. Hoover. Ken and Jean Hoover, who are butters. To the planning board and all of our friends and neighbors, a little history for context. In October 2019, the Hoover family property on Tufton Borough Neck Road was considered as one of a number of possible locations for the construction of a cell tower. The offer from Verizon said, should they have chosen our lot, would have been $24,000 per year for a 5-year lease. My sister Jean and I own this property. It butts my brother and sister-in-law Keith and Sherry Hoover's property at 89 Tufton Borough Neck Road. We entered into discovery with Verizon, even to the point of allowing them to walk our land for evaluation purposes, but could not move forward for many reasons I'll mention. Jean and I have over the years talked about putting retirement homes on this land that has been in our family for generations. The first home in our family built on the neck was in 1907. Keith and Sherry raised their children at 89 Tufton Borough Neck Road in a home they built in 1988. September of 2019, our brother Keith was diagnosed with cancer. He is still fighting that battle. So as a family, we researched the pros and cons pertaining to the health ramifications of living near a cell tower. There are reports that suggest cell towers may cause cancer, birth defects, reproductive problems, cardiovascular stress, memory loss, and headaches. Please note that we did not find any study that proved beyond a shadow of doubt that cell towers have negative health ramifications. More importantly, we did not find any studies that proved beyond a shadow of doubt that cell towers do not have negative health ramifications. There is also the consideration of the loss of property values on the neck. There is no way of knowing conclusively, but it would be my guess a cell tower next to my house would not drive up its value. Also, as a family, we have talked about our legacy, how we did not want the Hoovers to be remembered in Tufton Borough. If we want to be remembered as those people that put a cell tower up near my house, that could be adverse to me and my family, and that could potentially drive down the value of our family home. Not to mention the 130-foot tower is an eyesore. Of course, the answer was no. We don't want to be those people. We don't want to be remembered that way. So as a family, we decided not to pursue the granting of a lease to Verizon because of our belief that a cell tower could introduce negative health risks to family and friends. Verizon never did offer us the lease. We made our decision independently. To those on the planning board, please consider these 7 points. The proposed placement of the cell tower would be within a few hundred feet of Jean's and my property. We are butters because of the potential risk. This would destroy the dream of building there. and I believe it would negatively affect the property value. More importantly, I am deeply saddened that the ability to safely build on my own property would be gone. The proposed cell tower's placement is only an estimated few hundred feet from my brother's home, my brother who is fighting cancer. What is the potential effects on public health? Verizon may say that the radiation they emit is 1,000 times less than the limits set by the FCC, that cell towers are everywhere and have been around for years, and that there is no credible evidence that radiation from cell towers is harmful. They may also say that 5G uses a lower wavelength of radiation that cannot penetrate trees, houses, or even be on the skin of humans. All true, however, there are no studies of 5G radiation and its effect that I'm aware of. This is significant evidence that 2G and 3G radiation could be harmful, but is not conclusive. The best conclusion right now is that while there is no definitive evidence of harm, there is also no definitive evidence of safety. So the possibility of exposing family and neighbors to harmful radiation certainly exists. Members of the planning board and everyone present, do you remember when we introduced DDT, PCBs, lead, asbestos, and PFAS/BPA/pytholates from plastics? That there was also no definitive evidence of harm. It wasn't until we poisoned untold numbers of innocent people and wiped out countless animal species that we realized how harmful they were. This is our history: poison people first and only stop in the face of definitive proof of harm. In Europe, they do the opposite. They apply the precautionary principle. If there might be harm, they are conservative. Might this be a better way? Every year of my childhood, I came to Tuftonboro Neck with mom and dad and siblings to visit Carl and Olga Wood, my grandparents. As summer kids do, I ran barefoot about the property, turning over rocks looking for salamanders. It seemed back then that under every rock I would find one, and that on every tree there were songbirds. Some of you may remember that the year, it was the 1950s, early 60s, that Tuftonboro Neck was blanketed in DDT to kill the bugs. We were told with absolute certainty that DDT wasn't harmful. I'll never forget. The next year, salamanders were gone. The songbirds were hard to find. They went missing for years. I realized that DDT usage is not a direct correlation to cell towers, but is there a lesson here? Might we wait to build a cell tower on Tuftonboro Neck until there is conclusive evidence that they are harmless? He goes on, there are multiple quotes from the master plan, Tuftonboro. I guess I will read them. Please consider these quotes from the Tuftonboro Master Plan. Tuftonboro, the diamond in the heart of New Hampshire, is a small rural community defined by several distinct villages surrounded by water, forest, hills, farmland, and scenic vistas. Its citizens cherish their self-sufficiency, independence, education, community pride, neighbor helping neighbor, and volunteer spirit. Citizens overwhelmingly want Tuftonboro to maintain its current small-scale rural character into the foreseeable future, preserving the attributes that make living and recreating in town so unique and special. To provide a foundation and context for guiding future development in the town of Tuftonboro, the planning board with public input has developed a set of guiding principles. Following are a few of those guiding principles from 1.5 of Tuftonboro's vision and guiding principles. Respect, protect, and strengthen our sense of place. Strive to enhance our distinct, compact, historic villages surrounded by a village countryside of clean water, natural landscapes of water, forest, mountains, hillsides, and fields. To protect and preserve our healthy environment, promote the protection of natural systems that maintain clean water, clean air, and native wildlife. The preservation of our scenic features and open spaces that in combination help sustain Tuftonboro's rural character and ecological well-being, and sustainable use and stewardship of natural resources in a manner that does not limit the options of future generations. Does the installation of a 130-foot cell tower on Tuftonboro Neck clearly fall in lines with these guiding principles? Should an independent environmental impact study funded by Verizon be done to demonstrate the absolute safety of a cell tower before moving forward? As stated in the Verizon site plan application, height standards under Exhibit C, Appendix C, Verizon is asking the Tuftonboro Planning Board to permit an increased tower height beyond the initial standard of 20 feet above the forest canopy, 68 feet that is allowed by Section 13.4.4D of the zoning ordinance. Verizon argues that an 88-foot tower that is in accordance with the zoning ordinance's initial standard is insufficient to address the inadequate coverage in the area. The request of a 130-foot tower would be almost 2 times the height of the surrounding trees. Verizon argues that the 130-foot height is necessary to address the inadequate coverage in this area. I never did a scientific study, but the years I lived on Tuftonboro Neck, I didn't have cell phones. I did not have cell phone service difficulties. How necessary is the tower for the residents of Tuftonboro? And as far as visibility, I've seen Verizon's balloon pictures. I've seen the locations and angles from which they were taken. I don't care how clever, but 130-foot tower can't be hidden in a grove of 68-footers. If Verizon can't get the coverage result they wish to obtain from an 88-foot tower as allowed by Tuftonboro zoning standards, then maybe the job needn't be done. It is my understanding that the planning board does not have to grant this variance. Just to be clear, the planning board does not have the authority to grant variances. I am hopeful that no variance be granted and Verizon withdraws. I understand how frustrating drop calls can be as an alternative to a cell tower. Personal cell phone signal boosters are available in a number of places, including Amazon. Cell phone signal boosters for your home, car, or truck start at $199.99. Last, I would ask each member of the planning board not to vote solely on whether or not this project meets the requirements laid out in the zoning ordinance. Verizon is a huge and very wealthy corporation. Of course, they can hire an army of lawyers to follow the zoning ordinance. Instead, I ask each planning board member to ask themselves if they would vote yes if this cell tower were placed on land next to your home. Listen to your heart. Here are 2 questions I ask each of you to ask yourself. First, you're sure that you would be comfortable walking out your front door every morning and seeing a 130-foot steel tower next to your home? And second, are you sure that you would have no concerns for the safety and health of your children, grandchildren, and neighbors if this cell tower were right next door to you? If the answer to either of these questions is that you would be uncomfortable or concerned, then you must vote no. The planning board has an obligation to do what is best for their community, neighbor helping neighbor. I don't believe anyone on the planning board would, in good conscience, endorse a project on someone else's land. If you would not approve it if it were in your own backyard, please ask yourself those questions. What is your legacy to be? Sincerely, Ken and Jean Hoover. And lastly, there was a follow-up email from Ken Hoover citing any number of studies which are available in the public record at town offices if anyone would like to read. All right. Gentlemen, do you have anything to add to any of the public input provided by the emails that were sent in?
I do not.
Okay. Does any other member of the public have any questions for the applicant or the board? Is it the same question we've already asked multiple times?
No.
All
I
right,
want to
great.
know.
Name and address.
Oh, I'm sorry. Charles Hayes, 1 Hayes Camp Road, right off Eagle Mirror. Now,
Thank you.
I would like to know if the board has received any expression of approval from any of the public for this tower going up on Tuftonboro Neck. Any people from the public in the Tuftonboro Neck area?
Not in writing, but I can tell you my 14-year-old's pretty excited about better reception for his video games.
I guess my point is that I think other than the man that took money to provide the land, I don't think there's anybody on Tuftonboro Neck that wants this tower, particularly off Eagle Mirror Road. And I think there's a message there. And I think the board should consider that message before it grants approval for construction. That's all I have.
Thank you. Anybody? Okay, we're going to keep the public session open. I always like to give applicants a clear list of things that we're going to need. So this is what I came up with, the other members of the board. Anything you guys have as well, please add on. Number 1, safety and health information, health risks. And you mentioned that they have a standard as long as you're meeting the decibel standard, then the board does not have the authority to go beyond. If you
Yeah.
could,
I can add a reference to that.
yeah, let's
so-
get the reference on that. We're gonna send that to DTC.
Okay. And property line. I'm
Yeah.
gonna try to get a property line.
Yeah. Yep.
Reading.
So legal question about Tufton Borough versus Wolfboro benefit of height, RF, such and so forth. Sound study at maximum tower use at the property lines, meaning if you had all of your carriers and all of your generators were running at the same time. Because it's in the zoning for the decibel rating, so it can't be moved.
So for what we're proposing, we're at 39 with everything running.
Is that with all of the carriers?
No, although we don't have any additional carriers there, and I'm not seeking approval for 3 more now. Nor do I know what equipment they would have. I guess the question is, would each one that came on, if they came on, have to meet the standard, or do you start adding them up?
It would be combined for
Yeah,
the
it's
site.
going to be combined.
So that, I can tell you that I don't, even though I know there's more than one carrier on the one in Melvin Village, I don't believe anyone ever came back to the planning board for another carrier to be added to the tower.
Not in my memory.
So,
And how would you know if, say, there were 3 others?
exactly,
How would you know if they exceeded?
exactly the question.
So is there any way that you could estimate that?
Well, we could assume 3 more carriers with identical equipment functioning the same way, although I know that AT&T's cabinets are different.
We could do this a number of ways. Hypothetically, if this was approved, it could be a conditional approval that each carrier would have to come back for an amendment of a site plan and approve it. Or if we can get a reasonable ascertain and with the maximum use of the tower and everything running at once of what the decibel rating is,
Okay.
then perhaps we could avoid that.
If we knew what each piece of equipment was outputting in decibel,
I mean, I'm going to assume the generator is the loudest
and
things by
and that's
far.
writing, then you could see what a new applicant might say, hey, mine's at 46, yours is at 36. We know that we might be going above our
I
level.
mean, I'm going to assume the fans are not the noisy fan. I'm gonna assume
No, no, no.
generators.
So what I'll do is, I'll do a kind of a factual and then a legal response. The factual will be, we'll see if we can model it with 3 identical sets of equipment. And then you'll probably also see me say, okay, but the only thing that we're asking for approval for is the one, and if you need to condition or do whatever you do to, make it, we don't have a kind of a dog in the fight of anybody else coming on. I think at that point, it's a question for the town about whether you let somebody come in because you can avoid a new tower, and that would be a kind of a later thing. But I can at least see what it would look like if we assumed 4 generators and 4 fans, and just see what the number is. And then, if that's 49, then we don't have to even go beyond.
But you would be leasing.
Yeah,
So is there any way of saying that a condition of leasing is that they've got to tell you that?
I think any subsequent applicant, it would at least have to get a building permit from the code officer, and the code officer would
Yes.
have to confirm
I'll be honest
compliance
with
with
you.
the zoning.
I mean, we only have one other cell tower in town,
Yeah,
and I don't believe anything would happen when they added their antennas to it.
Good question.
I could ask you that.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's worth asking. And obviously, we're only looking for approval for the 1 installation, and we're under the standard there.
But it can take up to 3.
Well, I think what the code requires is that we have to make sure we design the tower so it could accommodate, but you wouldn't actually be giving us approval for any additional antennas or equipment above and beyond what we're showing in the application, I think. But let's run the numbers and then
Like I
we'll.
said, we could do a one, I think the board would be receptive to 1 or 2.
Okay.
Because 1, it's got to come back each time for the sound decibel, because it's in the zoning, it can't be waived.
Yeah,
Or the board's got to, or you got to be able to prove it with 3 carriers and the maximum amount of noise rate, 50 decibels at the property.
okay, got it.
Waiver lists all on 1 sheet.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Put your waiver requests all
Yeah,
on 1
yeah.
sheet, it's simpler. Abenaki Tower as an existing structure, not sure if you looked at it or not.
Yep.
Just some follow-up on that. send us a list of acceptable third-party engineers. If there's one that cross-references with DTC, then we'll go with the one that cross-references. If not, we'll go with whatever DTC recommends the most.
Okay.
But since you're paying for it, we'll certainly listen to your input. That's all I had.
Well, we're gonna give some thought to the, look at the curb cut down by the road, and the utility.
You're gonna call it the utility underground?
Yeah, well, I'll at least raise that with the construction folks and,
So I had 7 total.
okay. Yeah, so I just added,
Those aren't conditions, those are just requests.
two, yeah, so we'll put together like a supplemental application that contains all this stuff, same thing, tabs, the whole 9 yards, and watch the meeting schedule and get that in before you, and I'm assuming you're gonna want to kind of investigate the third-party RF review maybe before
Oh, yeah.
we meet again, so
Yeah.
I'll.
I don't think there's any point in meeting again until we have the
Until you have
third-party
the-
RF.
yeah,
because
so we'll pull-
that's what it all, that's all about the tower, I guess, the third-party RF. So.
Okay.
Can you verify the tree cutting? That there's no tree cutting outside the fence lines?
There's definitely no tree cutting outside the lease area or the 20-foot easement corridor. We would be allowed to cut within the easement corridor.
So you're 80 by 80 and a 12.
Exactly, as necessary to install.
And then the last one was just a general question I had. When you have a piece of property that has a cell tower on it, does it get taxed differently?
That depends on the assessor. That's
So that
up to the
property
assessor.
becomes quite a bit more valuable because it produces
Income. Yeah.
So what's traditionally done? I mean, we don't run into this very often.
Sure, so a lot of the times they'll put it on a separate tax card and and Verizon will pay the property tax on that portion.
Always good to know. One of our other jobs is to protect the tax base in Tufton, so it's always near and dear to my heart. Yeah. All right.
All right, well, I think we have our marching orders, so thanks everyone for your good questions and attention, and thanks for the public for showing up. We'll try to package this all together, get you information about a third party that we have, and then we'll take it one step at a time.
Sounds good. Before we go, does any other member of the public have any questions or anybody who called in?
They're all there, they can finally hear and see, so I'm not sure, but they're all muted, so I'm not sure if they want to say anything or not. But I do need to make it clear that we need to set the next public hearing date regardless of not knowing.
We're gonna continue to a date certain, but before we do, can you unmute them and allow everybody?
It's not me, it's them.
All right.
So let me just
Let's give
email,
them the 3-second warning that.
well, I'm gonna email everybody and just, chat everybody and see,
We should have chat function.
yeah, see if they want to.
So just everybody be patient for a second, let's make sure there's no one who is attending remotely who has any questions.
Will the public chat be available?
It should be.
Okay.
You mean the chatting that's been going on?
Correct.
I'm not sure. I've got to find where it's, people have been taking screenshots because they want it available, but,
This will also be available. YouTube, you put this up on?
That's correct.
Yep. So let's just give them a few minutes. Yes, Mr.
I
Hayes.
have one last question.
Name and address again, Mr. Hayes.
I'm sorry, Charles Hayes. I have one last question. Were there any other sites on Tuftonboro Neck?
All right, Mr. Hayes, I'm gonna overrule you on this one. We've already answered this one.
I didn't get the answer, I'm sorry.
The answer was no.
No. Okay. The only place, all right.
All right, once again, I'm gonna ask if there's any member who is, or any member of the public who is remoting in, if they have any questions before we continue to a date certain.
they're not chatting me back, so I would say,
Okay. So with that, can I have a motion to continue to a date certain of,
I don't know, how long is it gonna take for the RF third party?
I'm gonna assume they're used to this and that they can usually, do this fairly quickly.
And
'cause they're-
council review.
And council review, and that they can do this in a timely manner.
So a month, 6 weeks. May 6th is the first meeting in May, and May 20th is the second meeting in May.
I know that the next meeting is booked up, so that puts us.
We have applications on both the 15th and the 6th.
Well, we'll have to fit it in, so.
That's why I asked, what does the applicant want? May 6th, May 20th?
May 6th is the best.
Okay.
I have a motion to continue to a date certain of May 6th at this location at 7 o'clock.
So moved.
Second.
So moved, Freehold.
Barry Quah, seconds.
Yes. Carol?
Madoff, yes.
Dave Nesbitt, yes.
Matt Young, yes.
Barry Quah, yes.
Tony Creo, yes.
And
Thank you very much.
that's it for now, guys.
Excellent. Leanne, do you want me to give you these? I've got 10 copies of this stormwater thing. Do you want me to FedEx it to you? It's kind of thick, or do you want to just take them now?
Take them now because they can take them physically.
Okay.
Just the one for the.
You want subdivision? Richard and Mary Roswell.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
Leanne suggested I give it to you.
I know. Thank you.
Fancy chart. That's the stormwater.
Screenshot the public chat.
I can try. Corner of the screenshot. The guy.
Whatever is public, so I mean, yeah. Is there an ability to get to go to meeting
We're still on
after?
camera and everyone's talking. Are we all done tonight?
We haven't adjourned yet.
Okay.
It was a nightmare.
Okay.
Nobody could see. Like, yeah.
All right, does any member of the public have any general questions for the planning board about planning board matters?
All right.
So,
I didn't think so.
I will do my best.
Okay, thank
Just
you.
whether any member of the public had general planning board questions. With that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
No,
No, we didn't have a butter list.
Oh, what about the master?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Gary, you want to take a go for the master plan? I'm sorry.
We met last night, we've got the draft minutes, they've been sent out. We finalized the vision questionnaire, changes made to what was put under the 2022 plan. Other changes that we made to it were to finalize where the drop boxes would be.
Yes.
And for us to do that, Carol and I had to hit the road and go talk to some people to make sure they didn't have a problem with it. So we're ending up with 3 locations for drop boxes.
Thank you.
All right. The Pine Cone Restaurant will be one, Town Hall will be another, and the Town Library will be another. The post offices were a no. There's a rule with them that they won't allow it. Simply because if somebody drops their mail in our box and I walk out the door with it, it's illegal. So, I did ask 19 Mile Bay Store. They were a little hesitant. They said, "You call me back." They did not, so I ruled them out now to move forward. So that's where we stand with that. So that form will be, should have been, I thought I would have seen it today, but I'm sure I'll probably see it over the weekend, the final copy of that.
I could,
What's that?
if you want, I could talk to Pete 19.
No, it's done. We're all
Okay.
done. The other thing we discussed was the postcard. All right, so we had to come up with, we had to shift the dates because we're a little bit behind on this. And so the postcard is going to be the first thing to be mailed out, not the vision questionnaire, okay? And that postcard will have, within the next couple of days, we'll have the electronic version of that. and then we're gonna have to do a mailing on that. So you'll see a copy of that, Leanne. So how do we deal with that? Do you order postcards for us? Or what do we need to do?
I think we should take that conversation offline.
Okay.
because I don't think we need to discuss that at the
All
meeting.
right, so the postcard data will be here shortly. What else do we have, Carol?
The Survey Monkey link will be added.
Right.
You'll
see the Survey Monkey link soon. They found another part of that software to add to that tabulates all the counts. All right. So MRI has been designated now as a third party. They've agreed to that, and they found a software that they can take and load in all the tabulations of this stuff to correlate it, and it ties in with the Survey Monkey. So that's just about done. So we'll see that very shortly. So, and at that point, once that's done, we get a copy of the tax records. We're going to use the tax records for addresses by name, and when we see, a lot of people in town have multiple properties, so we're going to see if we see 6 labels for one person. We're only peel one off. The others we're going to waste, so we don't waste money. So the mailer will be put together by the members here. We'll spend an evening in town hall, and we'll go to print and do what we have to do. We'll just clarify postage and whatever, and we'll do that offline also. So we're getting close here to getting some action going, so this going out the door. Anything else on this, Carol?
No, I just think, just note the dates. The survey on the postcard will be May 15th to June 15th.
Right.
The Zoom roundtables that we're going to be doing will be June 7th to June 18th, probably every other day. Picturing Tuftonboro, where people can send in photos, that's going to be May 15th to June 15th. And then the boards that we're going to put up for comments, that will be May 1st to June 15th.
Boards, yes.
Yeah, comment boards.
Yep. So that's where we're at.
All right.
Any other questions? Good. Thanks, Eddie.
A couple of quick things. It made me think about when I saw Eversource was on the agenda for tree trimming. But it reminded me because we just went through this with scenic roads in the town of Tuftonboro. And even if the town of Tuftonboro is trimming in the town of Tuftonboro, it's got to go to the planning board for approval, unless you guys want to undesignate scenic roads in the town of Tuftonboro. Which I would be okay with, but the only reason I mention it is because I see all kinds of tree trimming going on.
Yeah, and I think those are, I'll double check, I think those are hazard trees, not general, for which there's an exception in the scenic, but I'll ask the question.
No.
Yep.
Or we could undesignate them as scenic roads. That wouldn't break them down.
Yep.
Just an update on Steve Hunter's site plan, the planning board council, because we have not heard from Steve. The conversation was, what is the next step? And his response was that the best way to handle it would be for the town to use the selectman and codes officer's office for enforcement to get the site plan finished. So he went off, talked to the town council about how to do that, and there was, town council wasn't particularly motivated by the planning board, but when it became zoning, the selectmen, they were very motivated. So where are we at on that?
Yeah, so that's, I don't have anything to report at this point. We haven't met since you and I had that conversation. I don't believe so. We'll, I'll keep you apprised of what happens going forward.
Okay.
Yep.
So
One other thing.
at this point, this has left the planning board's purview and has become the selectmen and codes officer's purview, just so everyone has understanding. So,
I sent an email to our attorney, Justin, regarding classing. Waiting to hear back from him. He's had it for a while, so I'll send him another reminder. You would be talking to him also.
I will be just on the questions. for
If
the
you think
safety.
about it, if you say, hey, you got an email from Gary.
Whole classes,
Can you
yeah.
respond to that? I know he gets kind of busy, so I requested a class on short-term rentals. Okay. And when we hear from him, I'll let you know.
Anybody else got anything?
No?
All right, motion to adjourn.
So move.
Gary
I'll
Clausen,
second it, Carol Bush.
Tony,
Yes?
Matt Young, yes?
Ferguson, yes.
Kate Nesbitt, yes?
George Madoff, yes.
Meeting,
Oh, yes.
sorry, Gary, meeting's adjourned.
I believe that.